Good morning, everyone. I'll just give it a few minutes before we start. Thank you. We could actually seize this opportunity and try to, introduce, so everyone can introduce him or herself on the chat. And where do you come from? Good morning, everyone, again. Bonjour à tous. Je vous laisse encore quelques minutes avant de commencer. Just a disclaimer, and we will be also sharing this during the introduction. We'll be sharing our resources and a lot of links on the chat. So please keep monitoring it. Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Yasmin Khalil. I am the CCFWE Communication Director. Welcome to our webinar on opening doors, making housing safer for survivors. I will start by our land acknowledgement. We recognize that the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, CCFWE, is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples inhabited and cared for this land and continue to do so today. As a grassroots organization, we commit to dismantling barriers to economic resources, especially for Indigenous communities facing abuse. Acknowledging colonialism's ongoing impact, we pledge to work alongside Indigenous peoples, following their lead to restore justice and build a better future. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, giving our respect to its first inhabitants. Content warning. So today's webinar discusses the topics of homelessness, domestic violence, and economic abuse and femicide. We encourage those who are attending to care for their well-being while engaging with this content. To victims, survivors, and advocates, rest and taking time for healing are needed to dismantle the systems that perpetuate these harms. Knowing and honoring your emotional limits is part of the work and essential for your humanity. The fight to end systemic harms is collective. Take breaks, step away if needed, and return only when you have the capacity to do so. When you need to pause, others will carry it for you. Now, my colleague also Lauren, I would love to mention that my colleague Lauren and our chat moderator will be sharing a lot of resources on the chat, so please keep on monitoring it again. We will be also inserting the bios and all the resources that will be mentioned on the chat today. So now I would like to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. We are examining the connection between economic abuse and housing insecurity and survivor empowerment as part of CCFWE's Help Us Rise campaign. The session highlights why understanding economic abuse is essential for safe, stable housing. We will begin the opening remarks from Ms. Rhett Haile-Yousses, CCFWE Executive Director and Founder, who will speak from both lived experience and national leadership on how economic abuse and housing instability intersect. Then Dana Burke, CCFWE Policy Director, will provide an overview of economic abuse, its link to housing and homelessness, and the gaps in Canada's current policy landscape. We will follow with an example from Circle Community Land Trust's Director, Communications and Engagement, Ivy Farquhar MacDonald, demonstrating how their model addresses housing barriers, including those experiencing economic abuse. We will close with a Q&A session, and we will be also including the bios in the link in the chat. So please, throughout also the conversation, write your Q&As in the chat, and we will get through them all at the end of our webinar. Now I'll give the floor to Ms. Rhett. The floor is yours.
Hi, Yasmin. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So thank you so much again on this important month, which is our Help Us Rise. It's truly an honor to join you today across Canada. I've seen also some common friends and supporters, and I'm very grateful every person on this call who really committed on safety, dignity, and justice for survivors every day. So today I speak to you not as a founder, as someone who have also lived through it, and also someone who have a first-hand experience how housing insecurity means. So this work is very personal, and it's also very emotional, and it reflects the stories of women we hear every day across from Canada. So through our campaign and our research, one truth has always come clearer than ever, especially after pandemic. The housing challenge and the economic abuse is always inseparable. So we can't talk about shelter, rental housing, home ownership without talking about credit sabotage, coercive debt, financial control, and systemic barrier that always punish survivors in many ways, and even the system is not built for them, as you know. So since last year, our team has examined the entire housing spectrum, and what we hear is so painful, which is consistent every year. So survivors who are already ready to leave violence, they can't secure rental housing because their credit is destroyed. Women still carry for a year's coercive debt. They are rejected by even the landlord. And also we have seen newcomers who flee abuse are screened out of housing because financial abuse is inflicted by someone else. And also we have seen many refugee women arrive in Canada. They came here in this country with hope and safety for new beginning, but the reality they face is heartbreaking. They came with no credit, no financial control of their own home country. Often even there is no any documentation because their partner control everything. So for someone, arrive in this country after war, displacement, trauma, only to face other layer of violence, hear economic abuse, it's totally heartbreaking. So we hear from even refugee survivors who says, I escaped war, I escaped abuse, but I cannot escape financial damage left, by the abuser. So we have seen that this is an ongoing issue. So many are denied housing because they can't produce Canadian credit report. This is a reality, and it's an urgent, and it shouldn't be ignored. So when someone chooses to leave abuse, this is one of the bravest decisions in their life. And, it's not about courage alone, but they need housing, they need financial stability, they need a system that understands economic abuse, how it looks like. So we hear survivor, usually they say, I left abuse, but still the date is following me. I escaped violence, but the credit system now is the biggest fear for many survivors. My partner destroyed my financial life. Now every door is closed. So economic abuse is not about finance. It's all about power. It's all about confidence. It's all about dignity. And it limits the access, the opportunities. And also it blocks the path to healing. So we have seen that. So today we are focusing on the rapid access for safe housing and rental unit, but this is one of the biggest gaps across Canada. Survivors need homes immediately, not after long waiting lists, not once their credit is repaired, not when they have a financially stable again. They need safety as human right. So when housing is available, as we know, survivors often face, another barrier, which is very painful. We know how our financial institution is very complicated and complex, including the screening process and the institutional requirements that, never take economic abuse in account, many times. So the number of credit reports, it doesn't tell the story of survivors. It can't explain the forced loan, the identity theft, the drained account. And it can also explain, the fears, the trauma, and the endurance. So I want to pause and then, hear every time that as someone who have a lived experience, it breaks my heart. So as I say, this work is not, professional for me. It's part of my lived journey because I was once upon a time denied to access housing because of my identity, because I'm a Black woman as well. And the credit issues, complex financial institutions, policies, due to the nature of violence, due to also the rigid institutional screening policy that never consider economic abuse is an abuse even in itself. So I know what it feels to face how instability and homelessness looks like. I know the fear of trying to build, and while we carry financial harm with someone else created, I know personally how it feels when the system judges you without understanding your story. And I know the courage it takes to start again in nothing, but it needs strength and courage and hope. So when survivors tell me that credit sabotage is keeping them from safe home, I understand the pain as someone who is advocate for this work for many years. And when they say rental rejection pushes them back towards to danger, I know how dangerous is that. So that's why I speak with so much emotion about this issue, because behind every policy conversation, there is always a real human being who deserves healing and dignity. So economic abuse is not financial issue, as I said, it's all about safety issues. It's all about financial, power. And if we want to name it clearly in this context, mortgage manipulation, which is the most common form of violence in the housing sector, forced loan, financial control, identity theft, these are not sometimes even financial problem. This is all forms of violence. So survivor with destroyed credit cannot build their life. They are always at risk. They are carrying their scar that the system cannot see. They are being punished for someone else's violence. And if you want to bring a meaningful solution, the housing sector, the financial institution, the government must come together and address this very important issue. So we need a rental screening practice that recognizes economic abuse. We need a trauma-informed mortgage policy, especially those homeowners. It's really very hard when you live violence to detangle your joint mortgage. We need a bank that understands financial control. We need a credit agencies that allow survivors to challenge a credit end date. We need accessibility in financial institutions that does not shut down people. We know how re-victimization impacts women. We need a compassionate understanding built into every steps of the process. So survivors need more than 4 words. They need a system that believes them, a pathway to rebuild credit, a chance to start again without being traumatized. We're advancing the national policy. We are gathering survivor story to inform change. We are trying to fight to ensure economic abuse never invisible again. So our mission is to make sure survivors are not left behind. So I want to end my speech. Survivors are not asking a special treatment. Never. They are asking fairness. They are asking understanding. They are asking safety. They are asking a chance to rebuild their life with dignity as a human being. Because housing is all about safety. Housing is all about stability. Housing is all about healing. So when we talk about economic abuse, we are not talking about money. We're talking about lives. We're talking about children who deserve safe home. We're talking about the future that deserve to rebuild hope and fear. So at CCFWE, we create many policies. So every policy we create have a power to save lives. Every door we open, we can change generations. So thank you so much for listening with compassion. And thank you so much for commitment to listen, to trust survivors. Thank you so much also for being part of this movement, because this movement is not an easy, it's a very complex issues we are dealing with. And thank you so much for joining us. So now I'll invite Dana to continue this important conversation to share how Canada improve forward a survivor-centered housing solutions. Thank you.
Thanks, Messi. I mean, speaking of opening doors, I mean, we're talking about housing, but Messi is a person who's consistently dedicated to opening up doors for everyone to have a platform, and I'm grateful for her leadership. Wouldn't be here today without Messi and her leadership to present. We can have the slides to start, Nerida, on the first deck, please. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Dana Berg, and I'm the Public Policy Director here at CCFWE. I use the pronouns she, they. I'm joining from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse nations. It is Treaty 13 territory. And while I always think it's really important to do a land acknowledgement while engaging in all policy work, I feel it's especially critical today when we're talking about homes and situating ourselves on the land we are privileged to call home, and reminding us of the deep connections between land, belonging, and justice. The ongoing housing crisis is rooted in colonial ideals of ownership and profit, and acknowledging how this came to be is essential a step of truth and reconciliation, and towards reimagining what home and community can mean in a more equitable future. Next slide, please. I also wanted to make a note about language, pulling from Social Planning's Toronto's recent report, which is really well done, about talking about homelessness, acknowledging that homelessness encompasses a large, diverse group, and there's no language adequate to describe everyone's experience. This is the same for people who are experiencing economic abuse. So while many people experiencing homelessness might refer to themselves as homeless, others might prefer the term unhoused or speak in euphemisms such as living in between places. This is the same for victims or survivors or those who have experienced economic abuse. I also want to acknowledge throughout the deck, we try our best to use gender inclusive language, but it's not always possible due to studies or references that focus on specific gender. Language is a practice of inclusion, which is not always a linear practice, but CCFWE is committed to trying our best to ensure that we're centering equity-centered language. So for those who may not know, what is economic abuse? Economic abuse is when a person in an intimate relationship tries to keep somebody financially dependent and in control. There are 3 ways in which this can be done. There's economic control, which is when someone limits or completely controls a person's access to financial resources and decision-making. This can include monitoring or restricting all of a person's financial activity, or denying them access to bank accounts and their financial activity, credit cards, or cash. Economic exploitation. So this is when a person actively damages someone's financial standing or credit. This can include misuse of money on things that should have gone to paying bills but spending it elsewhere, or actual frauds such as identity theft or opening up credit cards in someone else's name without their knowledge. And then there's the employment and education sabotage, and this is when a person controls or stops a person from being able to access or maintain employment and education. This form of abuse can be worsened if two people work together, such as co-owning a business. Examples of this can be preventing a person from working or attending job interviews, showing up to a person's place of business and harassing them, interfering with childcare or transportation, or damaging laptop or work equipment that's essential for a person. The lasting impact of economic abuse continues post-separation, and this is because, as Messi was mentioning, it can damage or ruin credit scores. It can deplete financial safety nets, such as savings and access to loans because of worsened credit, and all of these feed into barriers in meeting the requirements of today for securing housing, either renting or owning as proof of financial health to get housing. And as a result, there's an increased chance of homelessness and violence for victims of economic abuse. Next slide, please. Because of economic abuse, survivors face major barriers to securing and keeping safe housing. And without these options, many remain trapped or are forced to return to abusive situations. Safe housing is absolutely essential for rebuilding one's life, yet many survivors have poor credit, coarse debt, or no savings, leaving them shut out of most housing options. We know it can take a survivor multiple attempts to leave, and housing is a major reason why. 79% of shelter workers report survivors stay because they have nowhere else to go. Housing insecurity, and economic abuse reinforce each other, creating a cycle that's extremely hard to break. And financial health and housing go hand in hand. Without stable housing, it's difficult for anyone to maintain financial well-being. For survivors of economic abuse, this challenge is even greater. Rebuilding financial health requires time, administration work, emotional recovery, and support. When there's no stable housing, these steps become impossible to prioritize. Every part of economic recovery becomes harder when basic safety and shelter aren't secure. Access to safe, affordable, and stable housing is not just beneficial, it's absolutely critical pathway for safety, dignity, and long-term independence. There's also the issues of stigma and shame and taboos around money, which is reinforced by gendered beliefs about who controls or earns income in some cultures, making economic abuse difficult to recognize and discuss. Both of these issues, economic abuse and housing insecurity, are gendered and often hidden, shaping how women and gender diverse people experience housing insecurity. And this leads to the next slide, which explores the gendered dimension of the housing crisis. So studies have shown that when people, the average person, picture somebody who's unhoused, they often imagine a white man. And this assumption has often shaped how data is collected, resulting in major gaps in our ability to understand how many women, gender diverse people, and girls are experiencing homelessness or housing instability. The data that we do have significantly underrepresents their experiences, and the gaps are even wider for those who are gender diverse. Women and gender diverse people are also more likely to hide their homelessness, and this can happen for many reasons, such as trying to avoid the child welfare system, fears that shelter may be unsafe or non-inclusive, or choosing a familiar risk, such as staying with an abusive partner over the dangers of sleeping outside and picking an unknown risk. While we acknowledge that shelters are trying their best to provide services with shrinking funding and difficult times, many shelters are co-ed, may feel unsafe, lack space for children, or can't meet the survivor's specific needs, pushing people to remain hidden rather than seeking support. We also know that single mothers and trans women are the fastest growing of unhoused people in fastest growing population in Canada. With 1 in 6 single mothers living in poverty, the connection between gender, economic inequality, and housing precarity is clear and urgent. So approximately 95% of Canada's housing stock currently is private housing market, with only 5% available as non-market social housing. For survivors of economic abuse, this imbalance creates major barriers, and this is exacerbated if a person, this is exacerbated and not felt equally. So First Nation, Métis, Inuit, racialized, disabled, newcomer, refugee, and two-spirited LGBTQIA survivors are disproportionately excluded from the private market due to systemic discrimination and historic inequities that shape credit, savings, and access to wealth. Leaving abuse makes the private market even less accessible. When economic abuse is layered with racism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, and other colonial barriers, housing options narrow dramatically. Non-market housing is essential because it offers stability without requiring survivors to meet private market financial thresholds. But with only 5% of housing in this category and long wait lists that disproportionately impact historically marginalized groups, survivors are often forced into impossible choices. The combination of economic abuse and the privatization of housing places historically marginalized survivors at the greatest risk of housing instability, re-victimization, and in the most extreme cases, femicide. When housing is treated as a commodity instead of a basic right, those who are already affected by systemic oppression are left with the least access to safety. So we're currently, CCFWE is calling for urgent cross-jurisdictional action in response to the rising femicide rates. And a key priority in this call to action is acknowledging the intersection of economic abuse and housing insecurity. And expanding access to safe, affordable, non-market housing is a critical step in ensuring survivors can leave and rebuild their lives with dignity, security, and safety. Some gaps that are existing in Canada, we want to acknowledge that there is a new federal government and they're still introducing new policies. We're still figuring out what these programs mean and the extent of the work. But those presented so far are lacking a lot social and intersectional considerations. So at the federal level, some existing system gaps include that the National Housing Strategy frames housing as a human right, yet there's significant gaps when it comes to supporting survivors of economic abuse. While there's a recognition of gender-based violence in housing policy, economic abuse is again not explicitly acknowledged. And as we've talked, there's unique considerations that need to be thought of in order to address these issues. There's few targeted programs that meet those most vulnerable to homelessness and economic abuse. The new Build Canada homes does include some non-market housing considerations. However, it's so far looking like it's heavily focused on home ownership and private developers. So we need to continue to monitor and push forward to ensure that that's considering the needs of non-market housing. And also the recent federal budget has wrongfully framed immigration as a cause for the housing crisis rather than addressing housing financialization, income insecurity, or basic income supports as the solution and problems that need to be addressed. There's also a lack of coordination across housing, gender-based violence, and financial sectors, both as service providers and as system change work. And this is leaving survivors navigating multiple disconnected systems. And there's also an over-reliance of the criminal justice system as a way for survivors to get support. These are just some of the gaps that must be addressed to enable true economic resiliency and housing security. Next slide, please. So due to time constraints, I won't go into detail on the international models, but you can read it more in our housing brief. The point I would like to make, though, is that examples already exist that demonstrate that housing solutions which center the needs of survivors are possible. So while these ideas may be new to most parts of Canada, the models show that housing can be designed to prioritize survivor safety and stability and economic security, that wraparound supports, trauma-informed approaches, and culturally grounded programs are effective in supporting survivors to leave abuse. And there's also clear precedence internationally, meaning that Canada can learn from these examples and do rapid scale rather than starting from scratch, as there's already evidence. Next slide, please. So we've established that housing is fundamental both for safety and economic security, and stable housing allows survivors to leave violence without being forced back by financial barriers, and it gives them the foundation they need to rebuild their economic security. So over the next 3 slides, I'm going to provide some of the recommendations that CCFWE has put forward to all levels of government, starting with the federal government. The first is we want to see economic abuse integrated into the National Housing Strategy and Build Canada homes. These programs have to recognize survivors' disrupted credit, coerced debt, and limited savings, and understand that these are barriers that they don't deserve to be facing. They have to create a survivor-led housing advisory council, ensuring policies are informed by lived experience and trauma and culturally informed. shift from the framing from immigration to financialization in the approach of addressing the housing crisis. Affordability and systemic inequities are barriers with commodification of housing rather than seeing it as and it's not seeing it as a human rights issue. We also need to collect gender disaggregated and intersectional data so that we can understand who is most impacted and target sports specifically. We also need GBA Plus across all housing programs, and this must include beyond gender. It has to consider race, disability, indigeneity, and newcomer status to shape housing access. Next slide, please. For the provincial and territorial governments, we recommend setting long-term affordable housing targets for survivors, prioritizing deeply affordable rental and non-market housing for those leaving violence. We have to expand rent subsidies and safe at home initiatives, helping survivors stay in their homes or communities while bridging income gaps caused by abuse. And we have to remove rent geared to income eligibility barriers. Survivors often face disrupted finances or lack of documentation, and we have to remove these barriers to allow faster access to safe housing. And for those who are based in Ontario, I feel like Bill 60 is an example of what we should absolutely not be doing in order to make the housing crisis worse. For the municipal government, we need to strengthen tenancy laws to protect survivors. This is something we hear all the time from our national task force that we run. We need to, if a survivor wants to remove an abuser from the lease without having to potentially face a rent increase or losing their place altogether, these are things that need to be considered in the tenant acts. We need to help support shelter and housing staff to have access to training on economic abuse so that they can recognize it and know how to respond to it accordingly. So municipal governments need to fund and support staff to be able to do this. We also need to encourage cross-sector collaboration, and one way to do that is through our economic abuse screening tool. And next slide, please. So to conclude, the key messages that I really want to be left with is housing is not just about shelter. It's foundational to both safety and economic security, particularly for survivors of economic abuse. Policies and programs that ignore these realities leave survivors at risk of homelessness, re-victimization, and continued economic harm. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ivy, who's going to share examples of successful housing models.
Thanks so much, Jenna. Okay, I think I've got my slides here. So yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm here from Circle Community Land Trust, which is an affordable housing provider based in Toronto. And I'll talk a little bit more about us, but I guess our connection to this specific work is kind of twofold. One is that my boss, Alia Abaya, our CEO, has been sitting on the policy task force on economic abuse with CCFWE for a little while, and I've recently stepped in to work on that. And the other piece is that unlike a lot of affordable housing providers, Circle has family-size homes, and so we have a lot of women-led households, a lot of single mothers, a lot of people that are escaping abuse living with us, and it's not always official. We don't necessarily know who those people are, but we know that there are many living with us. So that's kind of like where the connection comes from. So just a little bit about Circle itself. Yeah, like I said, we're a nonprofit housing provider. We're actually quite new. We're only 4 years old, and we were founded to protect and invest some of the last affordable family-sized homes in Toronto. I'm not going to get into our history and how this really happened, but in 2022, over 600 single-family homes were transferred from their previous owner, Toronto Community Housing Corporation, which is the municipal social housing operator here in Toronto. They were transferred into nonprofit ownership. So Circle is the owner now. And if you're curious about that history, you can check out our website on the About Us page. It's a great story, but no time for it right now. We provide deeply affordable housing, so rent geared to income. And our houses are scattered all over the city. I'll show a map of them in a second. And, like I said, we're new, but we really are striving to keep our tenants at the center, make sure that they have a role in decision-making, and kind of support, more broad community well-being. And also, just in terms of how we take care of the homes, we're really trying to prioritize quality, security, and sustainability as much as possible. And we are a community land trust. So what that means is that we own our land, and we must put it toward community benefit forever. This isn't sort of short-term affordability. This is what we do forever. So in our case, that looks like providing nonprofit, deeply affordable housing. So I have a map here that just sort of gives a sense of where our houses are located. So if you're not familiar with Toronto, Toronto runs along Lake Ontario, kind of wraps around the city. So this is we're sort of seeing the eastern half of the city here. And so, like I said, these are single family homes for the most part, and they're scattered all over. There are a few in the sort of northwest end of the city, but for the most part, they are centered in the East End, so the downtown East End, so St. Jamestown, Leslieville, the Beaches, East York as well. And then there's also a lot of homes in Scarborough, so in the Golden Mile area, Wexford, Curran Hall, and quite a few houses in Malvern as well. And importantly, especially throughout Scarborough, that housing exists in areas where there are a lot of newcomer families and a lot of community agencies to serve different people that need them. And just to give a sense of what our housing looks like, these are a few different examples. So they're homes, we call them scattered homes. And this is a thing in affordable housing, but it's not very common. So they're houses that are really embedded into neighborhoods. So we have, old row housing in the downtown area. We have some heritage homes as well. We have a lot of mid-century bungalows and two-floor houses, sometimes with the garage in front. And then this middle house also just shows, if you look at the photo, you can see there's like a wheelchair ramp on the side. So a lot of the homes have been modified to be accessible for how people might need them. And, our sort of, most of our homes have 3 or more bedrooms. They're a mix of detached and semi-detached housing and occasionally small apartment buildings. So our target populations for new tenants when they move in are families with children. These are often newcomer families, or they may be a single parent family, often escaping abuse. And I can kind of explain how that happens in a moment. People coming from the shelter system as well. And importantly, these homes are very important to Toronto's sort of overall affordable housing landscape, because the city really doesn't have enough family-sized rent geared to income units. And so these ones are very valuable for that reason, and also very sought after. There are many, many people that are hoping to move into one of these homes. And I think beyond seeing it from this kind of, system level, just down to the individual experience, the homes provide a lot of really amazing benefits for the people who live there. Proximity to schools, kids can walk to school. Being part of, just sort of embedded into a neighborhood in a way where you can be as anonymous as you wish. You can have privacy, having enough bedrooms. So, we'll talk with families where for the first time, the oldest kid is getting their own room. Outdoor space, including like backyards with, like private fenced in area, storage space, garages, things like that. So when we're thinking about somebody who may be, trying to restart their life, these homes could be a really significant step for them. People always ask, so I'm just going to speak briefly for anybody who is in Ontario or Toronto about how you actually, someone gets a unit with Circle Land Trust. So and we're not able to maintain our own waiting list. So we do, because we get rent subsidies from the City of Toronto. So in agreement with that, we take our tenants from the City of Toronto's centralized waiting list. We also were able to set up referral partnerships. So every few vacancies, we are able to take new tenants from 2 different agencies that we set up with, which are Sojourn House Refugee Resettlement Agency and Wigwamin, which is Toronto's largest urban Indigenous housing provider. So they would have tenants either living in transitional housing or living in permanent housing that they've outgrown, and they would send them to us. And like I said, it's a focus on family-sized units. So it's kind of a niche thing that we do. We pride ourselves on sort of building up ourselves to be a specialist in this area. So wanting to connect a little more to some of what's been discussed already, I think So one thing that Messi and Dana both talked about is, the importance of social housing or deeply affordable housing. So we know that fleeing gender-based violence and economic abuse, this is already hard because of the lack of affordable housing options, and then of course economic abuse kind of compounds that reality. And so deeply affordable housing, like what Circle has, can really help address that and really be an important step for, rebuilding your life. And just like speaking about like, what does deeply affordable housing actually mean? So, in this moment that we're in this decades-long housing crisis, the term affordable has become really broad because so many different people kind of have a relationship with it and have their own definition that applies to them. And so as a result, we've come to this, other way of speaking about it, where we talk about deeply affordable housing. And for me, deeply affordable housing is describing something that's actually affordable for people in need. And very often, deeply affordable housing is coming from social housing. So social housing meaning government-supported housing. So Circle is an example of social housing where we're not actually a government agency, but we do receive rent subsidies from the City of Toronto, and we're regulated by the province. So the deep affordability that we offer is made possible through government dollars. So we are part of this social housing sector. And so in our case, we are rent geared to income. And so what this means is that all of our tenants have access to rent geared to income subsidies if they qualify. Not everyone does, but if they qualify, they have access to that. So their rent will be calculated at 30% of their income or less. If they're on social assistance, then it's just a sort of a standardized charge that they'll get for their housing allowance. So yeah, it really means that it's affordable for everyone. And in our case, like the way, just for people who don't know how rent subsidies work, it's basically that, the tenant pays their RGI rent, so generally 30% of their income, and then the City of Toronto sort of tops up the rest so that we can, as a housing provider, still do everything that we need to do to take care of the homes, to have staff to support our tenants in all kinds of ways, and also the rent geared to income administration is quite significant, and so you need staff on hand to do that. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, okay, so we know that social housing will often be deeply affordable, which is a really great start. But there's other ways, in my experience, that social housing is different beyond just being more affordable. And I wanted to kind of talk about a few of those because for me, it's really part of building a case for why this form of affordable housing is so important and needs more government investment, which is something, of course, that CCFWE is talking about a lot. So one of the things that makes social housing really different from, sort of conventional like private landlords is that we actually aren't looking to remove our tenants. So because there's no profit motive to what we're doing, we're not trying to, get tenants out so we can raise rents. And so, we work from what's called an eviction prevention approach. So it's really like eviction is the last resort. And there may be people going through eviction proceedings at any given time. And if you speak with social housing landlords, they'll tell you that there might be lots of people moving through the LTB process. But at every step of the way, a social housing provider is working to make sure to do everything they can to make sure that someone doesn't get evicted. And so, example would be that if somebody falls really behind on rent, which still happens a lot, even in rent geared to income, people fall behind on rent. And, so you create payment plans to make sure that they can get caught up, in a way that makes sense for the tenant and for the housing provider. Another thing that we'll do is, we'll have a lot of tenants that, may be dealing with PTSD, with other mental health challenges, and, are struggling to keep their unit up. And so when there need to be repairs done in their home, we have staff who kind of work with tenants to make sure that their homes can stay safe and sort of help them get ready for repairs and make sure that, that things can get done in their home and their home can still be a good, safe place to live, even if they're kind of struggling to keep it up themselves. And then another thing that I'm sure a lot of people here, at least in Toronto, would be familiar with is the special priority program. So this isn't something that like a housing provider like Circle, we don't directly administer this. It's run by the City of Toronto through their centralized affordable housing waiting list. But it would be something that we would receive tenants through pretty often. And we aren't, you know, for privacy reasons, we're not told who's coming to us through SPP necessarily. But, you know, folks have disclosed to me over the years that, you know, this is how they came to move into our housing. And, you know, we have a lot of single mother-led households who are really seeing these homes as a new start. And, you know, this is anecdotal, but I can definitely speak personally about people who've let me know that, you know, it's really been transformative for them to move into a house that's in a different neighborhood, that has privacy, that has, you know, sort of space to breathe. And, you know, like Messi was speaking, like space to heal, privacy being a big part of that, autonomy, feeling like I have my own house, I can move forward, I can, you know, rebuild my life. So those are just a few of the things that make social housing different. And, you know, something that it's beyond just being affordable. It's really, you know, it's in place for the people who need it. So all that being said, you know, even with all the benefits of rent guaranteed income housing, there's definitely still a lot of work to do. And people will see these numbers all the time, although I will say the numbers constantly go up. So unless you're checking them every year, you'll see they keep going up. So here in Toronto, we have over 90,000 people currently on the waiting list for affordable housing, and that's going up all the time. I can't remember exactly how many, but it went up significantly just from 2024 to 2025. And people will often talk about a 10-year wait for affordable housing, which is honestly optimistic. But importantly, and I think this really will resonate with this group, that many people on the waiting list are a single person, you know, like Dana was talking about, maybe a single man. But there's many families on the waiting list as well. And so this 10-year wait that often gets quoted is really more for a one-bedroom or a bachelor unit. And if you're looking for a place with 2, 3+ bedrooms for a family, it's easily over 15 years wait. So if you have kids, your kids will be grown up by the time that you actually get a place. And we do see families who move in who've been waiting that long, and their kids may be, you know, just out of high school by that point. And it doesn't mean they won't take the housing, but it shows that, you know, when people really need it, when they have young kids, it's not available to them. So that it really shows that just so much more investment, especially in family-sized units, is needed. You know, and getting into it. So even if you do get into social housing, it's, you know, it's a good start, but it's not a full solution. You know, I have people writing to me every week, you know, non-tenants who've heard about our housing and think, oh my gosh, this is going to be the answer for me. You know, and there's just not anything that we can offer them. And beyond that, even tenants who are with us, they may need supports. So we're not a supportive housing provider. Like we're not funded to provide anything beyond just, you know, good, solid housing and rent guaranteed income administration. That's really what we do. And we don't have funding to provide supports beyond that. And we do find ways, as much as we can. You know, we are trying to work from a compassionate and trauma-informed approach as much as possible, but, you know, the number of staff we have is limited. And, you know, for example, we have like 3 tenancy workers who are sort of working with different households on whatever issues are coming up, and they're in charge of about 200 households each. So it doesn't give a ton of time if you have even a few high-need households, you know, that can easily be all of your work. So just recognizing, you know, that it's like, because there's such a lack of affordable housing, people who may actually need more supports are just taking whatever unit they can get. So it might just be with a conventional affordable housing provider, because of course they're going to take something when they get it, but it means that the provider that they have may not actually be set up to best support them. And so like we were, you know, hearing about best practices from other parts of the world, really having, you know, better wraparound supports available, whether that's through a housing provider or through other community agencies, just more funding and more availability for those things is so important. And then another thing that I wanted to bring up, which I think directly ties to, you know, the realities of how pervasive, you know, gender-based violence, domestic violence can be, is that in our households, we hear about this, you know, so these are 3, 4, 5 bedroom households, often way more people living there than the number of bedrooms. And we see, especially with these households, that people will, grow up in them. But then because there are so few options for, kind of a next step, people won't move out. And, people have no choice but to stay together in these social housing units, even when there's a lot of conflict, which can really escalate sometimes. And then we're put in a tough place because we are just the landlord, and we actually have very little legal space or authority to intervene in interfamily conflict. Tenants will call on us to do that, to make a call and kick somebody out, but that's not really something we can do for the most part. So our staff will connect people with legal support. They'll put them in touch with community legal clinics, other agencies that can support them. But it's really like there's not a lot we can do to intervene, and we do see this happening. And and it's heartbreaking because the reason people are staying is they're in affordable housing, but they really need their own affordable housing, and they can't get out, because there's just no options for them. So we really do, join Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment in calling on governments to invest way more in social housing. Definitely with, the launch of Build Canada Homes, I think home ownership is like sexy to a certain subset of the population, but we know that there's just so much need in affordable rental and just like accessible housing for people that need it now. And, sitting on the policy task force so far has really been interesting, and has been and will be informing how we think about economic abuse as we're navigating relationships with our tenants, and as that comes up. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of this. And I think Yasmin is going to lead us through a Q&A from here. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Ivy. And yes, thank you for a very impactful presentations from all the speakers. And now the floor is open for the questions. I'm checking the chat, and I think there was one question that was coming about, are there affordable housing providers in Ottawa? That's the question that I can see. And I'm just inviting all the participants to share their questions in the chat. So the only question was about affordable housing providers in Ottawa. I'm not sure if this is something that we can
This is not my area of expertise. I don't know if Ivy, if you have.
I don't know specifically about Ottawa. I would imagine, like I know anecdotally that there is. It's very small, but there is related to us. There is actually an Ottawa Community Land Trust, but it's very new. They only own a couple of buildings. But I do believe that Ottawa also has its own social housing arm, like municipal arm. And I think that in all of these cases, it's just you need to get on the list, right? Apply to every list that you can. And if you're not sure, there's usually, like in Toronto, there's like a housing office that helps people apply for these. And I'm sure there's something similar in Ottawa. And really just like using the staff to make sure that you've got every option available to you, or also going to a community agency. They'll have housing workers, because I think a lot of people don't realize all that's available. And the waits are long, but the benefits are really big if you, and also importantly, like a special priority program, I don't know if it exists in Ottawa, but it does exist in other municipalities. So I wouldn't be surprised, or something similar. And it's important if you do qualify for that program. It really does, like you basically, you jump to the top of the list of the affordable housing waiting list. So if you know someone who's escaping intimate partner violence, who they live with, it has to be escaping someone that you live with. It's definitely important because it can get you into affordable housing quickly.
So yeah, so I have a question for Ivy, but before jumping into this, I would love to mention that Lauren and some of our great participants are sharing actually some Ottawa community and housing community. There is a question also directed to Ivy, curious about Circle Land Trust's policy for families who have children and what happens to a tenancy agreement in a multi-room house when the children age out.
Yeah, so I mean, we like generally how social housing works, the type that we operate is it's just like we're just a landlord basically. There's rent subsidies and there's this rent geared income support that we offer, but we don't people can keep living in their house. And so what we see is that the kids probably want to move out, but they often won't because there's no sort of affordable next step for them. And so we do see families where pretty often where there's 3 generations living all together. Sometimes that's harmonious, sometimes it's not. And yeah, they come to us, they say, I want my own unit. But part of the problem for us is that, so let's say we have a vacancy, we're put in this awkward position because theoretically we could split a household into 2. So we could, maybe there's a grown daughter that has 2 of her own kids living with her mom and dad, and there's tons of conflict. We could theoretically split those into 2 houses. But by doing that, what we're doing is we're taking away the opportunity for somebody who's been on the waiting list for many, many years to get that unit. And so it's like we're kind of in between this rock and hard place where our own tenants are coming to us with these, serious concerns, but we also, as a system, owe a lot to the many people who are in similar or worse situations on the waiting list. And it kind of, and making those decisions is really consequential. And so it just shows why we need way more social housing.
I think that I can see another question. I think it's for Ivy too. A client who is on RGI or SPP, how can they access the homes that you offer?
For us, how it would work if you're in Toronto is that you'd get on the waiting list. And if you have an SPP application, you will move up, it can sometimes take weeks, honestly, to get a unit. The thing with us is that we don't have a lot of vacancies. We will only have, I don't know, dozen a year maybe, because it's great housing, so people want to stay. So it all depends on what's available at the time. But I am actually working on something for our staff to use to help people find it. Because when you apply through the city, you're looking at the whole city. So you're looking at many, many thousands of affordable units. And often people will search by neighborhood, but in our case, we're in many neighborhoods. So there are some ways that we can sort of steer people to help find our housing. But the thing is, when you apply, there might not be any available. So it might just be that we don't have any units vacant right now because I think across the country, when people get into affordable housing, they never leave. It's hard to leave because you hold on to it.
And there is another question. What role does storytelling play in shaping public understanding of affordable housing and tenant rights? That's a great question, to be honest.
It is a great question. And I think this is something that struggles a lot. I also work with a housing organization as well. And the importance of having humanity at the heart of housing is always critical, but how do you do that and balance it without being exploitive? And I think it's really critical to have people who have lived in living experience participate in that story creation to help the public understand around affordability and tenant rights. And I think that's really critical. Also, just knowing what information is needed and how, and using plain language is really critical from a policy perspective. And yeah, I'm mindful of time as well, but that's a short to a conversation I could have for a very long time. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't agree more, Dina. There is, I think, a final question. Dimitra, is there no services around you like Habitat for Humanity that would help with getting the dryer and such?
I think there's ongoing chat conversations happening.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I thought it's a question. Oh, my bad. It's really amazing to see how the participants are engaging in the chat box. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's all the questions we received. Lauren, if there is something that you saw, please write it down on the chat. But I think that's all what I can see on the chat box. So. Yeah, so thank you everyone. Thank you everyone for today. And I would love to mention that there are highlight some of our resources for the Help Us Rise campaign. You will find our fact sheet on economic abuse and housing online on our website, on the CCFWE website. There is also the femicide brief, and it's now open for signatures to support our call to action. And it's also on our website. There is the Help Us Rise 2025 social media toolkit, so please feel free to download it. It's very accessible and help us in raising awareness about economic abuse and amplify the survivor's voice. November 26th is the Economic Abuse Awareness Day. So you will find dedicated social media toolkit on our Help Us Rise page. Feel free to use them, like and share the post to raise awareness about the day and about economic abuse. And also the 16 days of activism coming up. We'll be sharing a lot of stories and a lot of resources from our programs and tools. And we help, and we would like to have you engaged on that too. Would love to thank all the speakers for a great presentation. Here is Dana and Ivy's emails if you want to personally get in touch or would love to ask more questions. Thank you so much for such a great webinar, and thanks everyone for participating with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ivy.